Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Simon Fowler, CEO of Empowering People Group. I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting today's session, the 2025 Redundancy Landscape. Before we get started, here's just a quick overview of who we are and why we're here today. EPG is a group of HR, employment law, learning and career transitioning specialists. We deliver innovative, tech-led products and services designed to simplify employee experiences and empower people to drive business success. And at the end of today's session, we aim to equip you with practical, actionable insights and tips to help you tackle the challenges ahead and thrive in 2025. In the session, we're focusing on the huge topic of navigating redundancies, which many organizations are facing into today. Obviously, before we delve into that, there's just a bit of housekeeping to go through to help you get the best out of this session. The screen you see in front of you is customizable, so you can drag and move the speaker and slide views to position them however you prefer. You'll find speaker bios listed in the panel next to these, where you can read a little more about today's panel speakers. As always, we've also attached some resources on the topics being discussed, which can be downloaded in the resources section now, or look out for our follow-up email, which will include these along with a recording of this webinar. Lastly, but not least, there is a contact box below, so you can get in touch with us anytime during the session. And if you'd like to ask a question, simply pop it in the Q&A comment box at the bottom of the screen. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can towards the end of the session, but if we don't get to them all, and we rarely do, we'll follow up with questions, with answers after the webinar. So let me introduce you to the rest of today's panel. I'm delighted to welcome back Rena Christou, Managing Director of our Employment Law Division and a regular feature on our webinar panels. As usual, Rena brings her innate ability to simplify complex legal speak into easy to digest commercial speak. So welcome, Rena, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No worries. I'm also very happy to be joined by another regular on these sessions, Claire Cowan, Commercial Director at our Career Management Division. Claire is an expert in coaching and outplacement support, and she expertly balances commerciality with an enviable people centricity, which makes her the perfect panel speaker to discuss how we manage change with compassion. Welcome back, Claire.
Thanks, Simon. Really good to be here.
Great. So let's get started. I don't need to tell anyone attending today how the current economic and regulatory landscape is presenting significant challenges for organizations and HR teams. Rising employment costs, coupled with economic volatility and the threat of new tariff pressures from the US, are placing an increasing mounting strain on employers. This unpredictability is forcing many organizations to have to tighten belts and make really difficult decisions about their workforces. Alongside all of this, UK organizations are preparing for the biggest shift in employee rights in a generation, bringing even more complexity and challenge, all against a backdrop of a period of the lowest hiring confidence in a decade. So organizations are facing the unenviable task of delivering more with less in ever more challenging working environments. They need innovative solutions to balance legal compliance with employee experiences and strategic priorities. And today we're here to explore how organizations can navigate this turbulent period of uncertainty to drive better business and people outcomes, even when faced with the difficult decisions of reducing headcount. So let's dive into the detail. Firstly, Claire, we know reactionary short-term fixes to periods of volatility like wide-scale redundancies can create long-term operational challenges. So in an ideal world, organizations would avoid reactive decision-making and would instead take a considered long-term strategic approach to the challenges ahead. But as we know, this is rarely the reality when faced with the perfect storm of increased costs and complexity, and especially at the speed we're up against today. So when workforce reduction becomes somewhat inevitable, what do organizations need to prioritize?
Thanks, Simon. And yes, you're right with that perfect storm analogy. And before I answer the question about the priority, I just wanted to share some stats that might really help to put this into context. As you mentioned, recent research reveals that UK businesses are facing the largest wave of redundancies in a decade outside of COVID. The CIPD labour market outlook shows that 1/3 of employers plan to cut jobs or slow recruitment, with 16% expecting layoffs in the next quarter, which is up from 11% last quarter. This is putting incredible pressure on already overstretched HR teams. The pace of change is accelerating faster than many HR teams can manage, which is driving a significant rise in interest for HR outsourcing. In fact, searches for HR outsourcing have surged by more than 300% compared to last year. So this gives us an indication just how stretched HR are to the max. So when organisations undergo people impacting change, like redundancies, the burden on HR obviously intensifies, all at a time when statistics show that as many as 94% of HR managers are saying that they have signs of burnout. HR teams are faced with preparing for legal changes, supporting people through uncertainty, guiding leaders, protecting culture and brand reputation, whilst expected to deliver the day jobs. So providing access to the right tools and resources is key to support HR and enable them to effectively navigate and implement change whilst ensuring they're not completely burning out.
Wow, that's a pretty scary stat, Claire. I mean, 94% is huge, isn't it? And it explains why we're seeing an increase in demand for outsourcing. As you said, it's a clear sign that businesses urgently need scalable solutions to support the HR team and wider workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows we've already reached a critical point. So coming back to your question, Simon, I'd say priority number one really has to be to identify where additional support for HR would add most value. And I think to do that, organisations need to take a step back and focus on the long-term picture. While surviving in the moment is vital, it's also about adopting a balanced long-term strategy that ensures compliance whilst nurturing employee engagement and well-being. And HR really is vital to the success of this. But the current operating model in many HR teams means that they're so bogged down in the day-to-day operations and firefighting and admin burdens that it means it's very difficult for them to get their head above the parapet and really mean that they can focus on the people and not just the process.
I couldn't agree more, Claire. I mean, it's critical that organisations act now to improve ways of working and reduce the pressure on HR and the wider workforce. So let's delve into some more practical steps that help simplify the complexity of managing these redundancies. And with that in mind, Renna, could you outline the key legal changes organisations need to be aware of when it comes to redundancy processes, please?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Of course. So let's start by unpacking the legal and operational challenges businesses face when downsizing their workforce. I mean, the first thing to note is that there are different rules which apply depending on how many redundancies an organisation is looking to make. So if you're looking at making 20 or more redundancies at one establishment within a 90-day rolling period, you'll trigger what's called collective consultation obligations. So that means that there are additional specific steps that you need to follow. And I just flag that it's really important to be careful when you're calculating whether or not you've hit that 20 mark, because fundamentally it's not just your permanent employees which fall into the mix, but also it could be any fixed term contracts that you've got that you don't renew because of the redundancies that you're proposing. And it can even be job offers that you're withdrawing as well. So calculating that 20 is not always quite so straightforward. And especially as well, if we look at the test around one establishment, it's not always looking at by location of a workplace. So it might be that there are some sites that are classed as actually one establishment in themselves, even though they are unique locations. So for example, if they share resource. And the reason that matters in particular is that there are some pretty punchy awards for getting collective consultation wrong, and actually even criminal sanctions. So you've got to get the process right. It's also worth flagging, so in addition, since January this year, tribunals have been given the added power to impose a 25% uplift on protective awards in collective redundancy cases. So if employers breach the statutory consultation code, they could find themselves with an extra 25% uplift on compensation, so sharpening those financial consequences for procedural missteps. Also worth bearing in mind, so looking ahead at the Employment Rights Bill, which I know has been high on the agenda and we're talking about it a lot. That's currently progressing through Parliament, as we know, and there are proposals for further reform. So actually there was a meeting that took place last week, and there are more committee meetings coming through. So watch this space for the details to be nailed. But given that that's going to likely add further complexities around redundancy processes and redundancy dismissals, it's important to review your redundancy processes now and ensure that you're streamlining the consultation frameworks, your selection criteria, and also that your documentation that you have withstands scrutiny.
Yeah, thanks, Rina. I mean, this has added significant complexity for businesses and HR teams. And given these layered reforms, could you clarify how the Employment Rights Bill could redefine redundancy processes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of the Employment Rights Bill, it is picking up pace in Parliament. There's increasing chatter that it might even receive royal assent as early as the summer, so much sooner than many of us anticipated. However, that said, most of the changes it brings won't actually take effect until autumn next year. But it's still absolutely critical to prepare now, because the bill could shake things up in some really significant ways, especially for employers who are not on top of their compliance. So first off, the controversial fire and rehire tactic is now facing tougher restrictions, as you'd expect. So that practice, in terms of employers dismissing colleagues and rehiring them on less favourable terms, is being curbed by a new code of practice. And under the updated rules, if an employee doesn't agree to contract changes and is dismissed as a result of that, the employer can no longer simply hire someone else on the new terms for the same role. So there could be some serious legal consequences, again, including up to a 25% increase in penalties. In terms of collective consultation itself, so right now the threshold kicks in when there are 20 or more, as I mentioned, at a single site, so one establishment. But what the bill is aiming to do is to add potential additional company-wide triggers. So effectively, you'd be looking at whether or not you're hitting a certain threshold, which we're yet to uncover exactly what that figure will be, but across your whole organisation. So you'd be looking at multiple locations, adding up the potential redundancies across those sites. And if they meet the threshold, then again, even though they're not all in one location, you trigger collective consultation. The other thing to flag is compensation-wise, they're looking at increasing the protective award from 90 days to 180 days uncapped pay. So that's gross pay per affected employee. So lots there to unpack. In practical terms, there are definitely a few things that employers should be thinking about now. So first, if you've got any restructures in the pipeline, it's definitely smart to bring those forward. So get ahead of the changes, have a think about what resourcing you need and plan accordingly. Make sure everyone knows who's responsible for what. So clear accountabilities are really, really important, especially if you're in a situation where you're pooling employees, to make sure that the right employees are being pooled in the first instance, and also tracking the performance proactively and capturing that. So again, if you're having to score individuals that are being put into the same pool for selection, that you can genuinely evidence why somebody is scoring more favourably than somebody else based on objective criteria. So that keeping solid records thing has to be the most important one. You'll need robust documentation if consultations are triggered under the new rules. So preparing early, organisations can absolutely stay compliant, and employees will inevitably benefit from clearer, fairer treatment across the board. So win-win.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Rina. We can't emphasise enough the importance of preparing now. Right now, we're looking at compliance with compassion in redundancy. And redundancies are always challenging, not only for those directly affected, but also for the managers and HR teams guiding impacted employees through it. It's so easy to focus solely on logistics and legalities, but at the core of this, we're talking about real people, their lives and their livelihoods. I think organisations that show genuine care and empathy during these times don't just protect their reputation, they build long-term trust and loyalty. So Claire, from your perspective, what steps can businesses take to prepare, not just in terms of compliance, but also for the emotional impact of redundancies?
Yeah, and I don't think we can avoid that fact that redundancies are really difficult situations to manage. But if they are managed poorly, then they can lead to the legal and reputational risks, as well as having a really profound impact on productivity, whether that's the individuals that are impacted, but also, the effect on wider employees as well. So those risks are increased if there's a failure to show compassion in the process. When employees feel they've been treated without empathy and compassion, it can lead to feelings of resentment. This not only contributes to increased stress and disengagement, but also raises the risk of legal challenges and reputational damages, especially if the communication is unclear or perceived as unfair. A lack of appropriate support for impacted employees is one of the most common pain points that we come across. And if organisations don't provide proper support, this emotional toll can quickly ripple right across the business. So I've summarised how we can ensure the redundancy process is managed with both care and clarity, and here are 8 points to consider. Getting the process right. Ren has already highlighted how vital the process is, and the legal consequences, the moral issues, and the damage to culture that can all result from processes that lack consistency, transparency, and empathy. And avoiding this requires a combination of training, technology, and effective support. Number 2, making compassion central to your approach. Employees who feel dismissed or disregarded are much more likely to disengage. They might take legal action, and they're much more inclined to be vocal about their poor treatment, and that then risks reputational damage. Compassion really can help to preserve dignity and relationships and reduce the overall risk.
I think, Claire, sorry if I can just pick up as well there. I think often, that's the employees, but I think also their colleagues who may not be affected by the redundancy process. They're kind of thinking, it could be me next time and I'm going to be treated badly. So what will I do in the meantime? Probably look elsewhere or be, dissatisfied, demotivated. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's often a real focus during periods of change around the people who are impacted. But actually, there's a real ripple effect to their line managers, to their colleagues, to everybody across the business. And we're in a situation now where change is happening so regularly that people will be feeling, if it's not me now, it may well be me next time. So providing support and compassion throughout the process for all colleagues and making sure that, is there throughout is really, really important. And it brings me on to point number 3, which is providing outplacement support to those impacted. And yes, it's super important to provide this support because if you're impacted, if you can provide access to help people with outplacements, so career support, mental health support, providing access to those career transition resources is vital. These can really help to reduce distress and help employees to move forward more positively. And we'll cover more about outplacement later in the session. Point number 4 is communication with clarity and care. And uncertainty breeds anxiety. So it's so important to make sure that the communication is clear, that people understand the timelines, that you've got clear and open processes, that the language being used, if it's empathetic, it makes such a big difference. And that you've got that compassionate communication because it absolutely does build trust during times of upheaval. And also point number 5 is about managers. And it's investing in support and training for managers. Managers are often tasked with delivering these difficult messages, and many of them might be impacted themselves, or they may not have been through this situation before. They might lack confidence or skills to say the wrong thing or the right thing. So again, if you can provide support and training to people, it can absolutely help to mitigate any risks, whether that's emotional or legal.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Claire. I think that's a really important point. I mean, often, as you say, this will be the first time a manager is faced with supporting employees through redundancy, and it can be a totally overwhelming experience. I remember it myself, which can impact your well-being, productivity, and ability to effectively manage their team through this change. In fact, I was reading something the other day which was saying that HR believes that 75% of managers are overwhelmed by the responsibility. So adding redundancy into the mix creates even more risk and pressure. For me, I think it's often a point that's overlooked at times like this. So what do you think, what strategies do we need to consider to avoid adding to the very real risk of manager burnout here?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Simon. I think it's not just HR that are feeling that burnout or that potential overwhelm. And managers are already responsible. They're managing complex, everyday people matters. And suddenly, and these can be quite sudden, situations can arise and people aren't expecting it. They didn't expect these changes to happen. And suddenly there's an increased complexity of redundancies. And I think overwhelm is a huge risk. So I think the key here is to consider how you can improve engagement for those managing the process, but also those whose teams are impacted. And it's about signposting support. It's about people understanding where they can access resources, whether that's mental health support, whether it's career support, whether it's peer group support and their colleagues who are available to them as well. And I think it's also important that the organisation recognises that this is a really challenging time for everybody and that there is strain on those involved. I think digital training can help as well. I think if timescales are tight and you need to quickly upskill managers, whether that's on difficult conversations or helping employees, to actually be able to start those conversations. I think there's a place, and I think that can be beneficial as well. But I think it's really, really crucial that those managers do feel supported, and they are supported, not just the employees, but the managers who are having those conversations are really supported as well. Going back to the list of 8, so if we move on to point number 6, I think this is a point that can often be overlooked. I said before that during a period of change, there can be quite a lot of focus on the process and the individual who are impacted, and the support and the support that's being provided for those people. But actually, it's about supporting people who are remaining in the business. This is the future of your workforce. This is the people who are taking the business forward. And survivor guilt can be really common after redundancies. As you know, there's often less people, there's more work, and people feel a whole host of emotions if they haven't been impacted by change and are remaining in the business. And that can significantly impact morale. It can impact engagement. And I think ignoring that emotional fallout can potentially cause some longer term disruption within teams. So again, I think it's important for HR and business leaders to consider the methods of communication and provide support for those remaining in the business after a period of change and redundancy. Number 7 is about supporting HR. We've said this already, how important HR are in these periods, but also the significant pressure they're already under. And again, if it's an unexpected change programme, then, managing periods of redundancy, and we've talked already about the number of meetings and consultation, and actually understanding what consultation could look like, can really drastically increase this. So the focus really is on how we can or certainly a focus to look at is how can you improve the process and reduce the admin burden on HR to give them the capacity to focus on people and not just the process. Because those involved in supporting the redundancy process can and will carry that emotional load. So again, that shouldn't be overlooked as part of the planning process. And finally, on to point 8, although this certainly isn't an exhaustive list, is thinking about how technology can support a more compassionate experience. Technology can streamline tasks, it can reduce compliance risk, it can ensure consistent, compassionate communication, and it can give HR and line managers more time to be human. So finding the right technology to support your company, it might seem like a time-consuming process if you don't have the capacity to deal with in times of change, but that's where engaging companies like ours can really help. And I know, Simon, you're going to cover a little bit more about that in a moment. I think to summarise those 8 points, I think it's absolutely fair to say that redundancies will never be easy, but you can reduce the risk of them and certainly try to avoid causing long-term harm. And when organisations take a people-first approach, which is grounded in empathy, structure and support, you can not only reduce risk, but help to preserve the trust, your culture and employee well-being. And I think these considerations help to really make sure that even in difficult times, employees can feel seen, heard, respected and supported.
Absolutely, Claire. I couldn't agree more. Redundancies by their very nature are complex, and done badly can be emotional and legal quagmires, as we've discussed. But just coming back to your final point about the right technology, this is why we developed our Meeting Manager platform. Through decades of managing people impacting change, we've seen firsthand how teams get absolutely bogged down in admin and process, so can struggle to focus on the people in the process. We wanted to change that, so we developed Meeting Manager to automate the heavy lifting when managing consultation processes such as diarising meetings, providing meeting scripts, note-taking, and tracking real-time progress. So Meeting Manager simplifies all these elements, and it allows for real-time monitoring, highlighting any red flags that might be cause for concern, which of course reduces the risk and provides peace of mind that the process is being managed consistently and compliantly, which also frees up HR to focus on the employee experiences and the compassion that we've just spoken about. I mean, this is just a snippet of what Meeting Manager delivers, but in short, it completely transforms consultation processes and enables more compliant and compassionate processes. For anyone joining today who's preparing for change, you can watch a Meeting Manager demo in the resources below, or reach out and we can arrange a personalized demo. Okay, Rena, can you dive deeper into the compliance point to really drive home why it's so vital to get the process right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more that the right technology can play a huge role in helping to improve compliance and compassion in redundancy processes. So legal implications of not getting the right legal support early on can be severe. When redundancies aren't managed correctly, it can result in unfair dismissal claims and costly employment tribunal cases, which can inflict lasting damage on a company's reputation. So not just the financial costs, but so much wider than that, as Claire mentioned: retention, engagement, morale, and of course reputation. So customers, investors, and potential talent all pay close attention to how businesses navigate these challenging situations. And with the new Employment Rights Bill raising the stakes, it's more important than ever to ensure your processes are compliant, transparent, and of course ethical from the outset. So early legal advice and the right tools can help businesses avoid costly mistakes and protect brands. We provide practical support with settlements and legal agreements, and our team drafts settlement agreements and advises businesses on exits and negotiations. Alternatively, we can be recommended by employers to departing employees as well. So ensuring that your colleagues, if they're impacted, receive independent legal advice required on any agreements that they're given. We've also developed a redundancy toolkit, so a comprehensive resource that guides businesses through each stage of the redundancy process with user-friendly templates, clear guidance, and the toolkit empowers you to manage redundancies professionally, importantly compliantly, and with compassion yourselves. And ultimately, you can download more information on these in the resources section if you'd like some.
Great, thanks, Rena. These resources are really valuable for supporting compliant redundancy processes. Equally important is considering what happens post-redundancy. At this stage in the process, it's your organisation's chance to step up and show a really strong duty of care for its people. Claire, as experts in career transition and outplacement support, can you share more on this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think outplacement support is hugely valuable, and can add so much value to people if they're leaving. And it absolutely sends the message to other employees that you are protecting and supporting those to leave well and to have that support when they leave. And I think when someone hears your role is at risk, they feel a whole range of emotions, and it's often not just a job loss. It's a huge shift in their identity. People are likely to feel vulnerable. And the uncertainty and fear that can follow can quickly spiral if there isn't clarity or empathy in communication. People can often feel anxiety and decreased morale. And it was said already the impact that can have in terms of productivity, and also impact wider employees remaining in the business as well. So I think in terms of post-redundancy, there are, I think that response is about being compassionate and effective. And here's kind of three core areas that really can help in terms of focused. So first up is supporting departing employees with empathy and respect so that they can leave well. Redundancy affects someone. It's much more than someone's job. It hits confidence, it hits well-being. And the way you support your people after the decision is key. And the right support can transform experiences. So let's start with outplacement. I've said already how important that is around, it's not just for those that are leaving, because it helps them with CV writing, interview technique, job search advice, and it's much more than just a gesture. It's a bridge to what's next. It's about supporting them to leave well, to start to move on positively. Perhaps they may have been out of the external job market for many years. Things have changed considerably in the job market, particularly since COVID. So it's a huge, investment to support people to leave well, so they move on successfully. But also, Rena said already about, it's potential people who may join your business. So it's brand reputation, it's talent in the future, it's reducing risk. But it also sends a message to remaining employees that if people are impacted, then as an organisation, you do look after people and you do support them to move on from the business well. I think mental health support is also very important. And whether that's offering access to employee assistance programs or EAPs, counselling, financial wellbeing advice, anything that can help to normalise conversations around that emotional impact can really help. And I think lastly, and it's, perhaps most importantly, it's about good communication and clarity, because they absolutely play a critical role. Ensuring everyone knows what the process will involve and how long it will take is vital. And if you're communicating to leavers information such as final pay, benefits, references, will really help people to understand where they stand. It'll help them to make informed key decisions. And that will just help to reduce uncertainty, because it's that uncertainty that can add to stress. And again, transparency isn't just around dates and process. There's an awful lot of focus always on the process. But if you can focus on the people and acknowledging the human impact, that always makes these situations much, much more successful.
Yeah, I totally agree, Claire. There's no avoiding the impact these processes can have on individuals. So offering support like this is clearly critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see firsthand every day the incredible impact support like this can have on individuals. But we touched on it already. So it is about supporting people who are impacted. It's supporting people who are leaving. But actually, it's also really important to consider support for those who are remaining in the business. After a restructure or a period of change, morale in the team can take a dip. Anxiety can rise and loyalty can erode. So that post-redundancy care is really important. And to avoid feelings like that, I think it's there are some key areas that organisations can focus on. I think the first is acknowledgement, not avoidance. So I think, don't pretend everything's back to normal. Address the changes head on and be transparent about what's next. Wellbeing check-ins, again, really, really important. And, how you can encourage your line managers to have informal one-to-ones, to check in, to see how people are doing, how they're coping. Survivor guilt is a very, very common emotion, and people feel a whole host of emotions as well. So I think those one-to-ones and check-ins are really, really important. Team rebuilding. So, after a period of change, supporting managers with training and advice on how to reconnect with people, how to re-engage their teams, understanding the purpose and the values of the business. Be really clear about those future goals. What is the vision? What's happening next? If there is the ability to reassure them on job or employment security, then where possible, that's a really positive thing to do. And really make sure that people are involved in shaping that next chapter. And I think as well, it's about workload management. So we've talked at the start about burnout. So again, I think it's really important that after a period of change, it's not just thinking about redistributing work from those redundant roles, but really thinking about the capacity that individuals who may need to take on additional responsibility have got, but also thinking about whether they need to be upskilled or reskilled as well. So hopefully that's a quick overview, but the main point to recognise is that cutting corners on redundancy support is a false economy. Ren has talked already about the potential risks, whether that's a tribunal claim, reputational damage, disengaged teams. All of those costs can really overshadow any short-term savings. And your return on investment in delivering compassionate redundancies is to build loyalty. It will protect your employer brand, and it'll position you as a leader who does the hard things right. And in a world where Glassdoor reviews and LinkedIn posts live long in the memory, your redundancy process can make a huge difference on how your organisation is perceived. So, if you're starting to think about headcount changes and redundancy plans, really plan with empathy, communicate with care, and let your actions prove that even in difficult times, your values hold firm. And I think really importantly, in terms of the communication as well, but remember why you're doing it. It's to protect your people and your organisation's future.
Thanks, Claire. That's a really important point to end on. I think if you've handled the process with empathy, clarity, and care, you'll have laid a foundation of trust and understanding with your workforce. That trust doesn't just help you weather future storms, but it actually becomes part of your culture, showing your people that even in the hardest moments, as you say, they're not just a number. Okay, so that's everything we planned to cover today. Thanks, Rena and Claire, for your insightful inputs. Before we move on to questions, you can see on screen here all of the services we provide as a group to support you in end-to-end in delivering compliant and compassionate redundancies. Whether it's toolkits to technology that simplifies the process to settlement agreements and outplacement support, we are truly a one-stop shop. Simply scan the QR code to find out more. So, let's take a little look at a couple of questions. So the first one that's come through, what about managers who might also be in redundant positions? What can you do to support them to support their teams as well as going through the process? Claire, do you want to
John. Yeah, I'm really happy to pick that one up. I think we've said already about the managers, but they're such an absolutely critical. They will be influential in whether this change program or period of change is successful or not. And it's about thinking about those managers right at the outset in terms of the support that's being provided to them, particularly those who the question relates to. They might be themselves personally impacted. So again, a lot of the time for managers, it's all about the team and they're focusing on everybody else, but actually their role's impacted as well. So it's absolutely crucial to think about the managers who are impacted personally, as well as those that are delivering, difficult messages and providing support to them. Whether that is support around having difficult conversations so that they are able to have the conversations with their team, or whether it's for them to understand what resources are going to be made available and signposting to that support. I think those that are also in redundant positions, that's where understanding that there will be support like outplacement being made available to them is critical. And a lot of organisations where you're making outplacement available, it's thinking about where you position that in the process and letting people know, because if people know that there's support available, that can take a huge amount of the worry away, because people do feel supported. And I think those that are in a redundant position from a manager perspective, outplacement support gives them a confidential space to be able to talk through their situation with an expert. So that again can make them feel better. But I think it's about that peer group support as well. So again, I think tailored support for managers around having difficult conversations, understanding those that are impacted, and the benefit of outplacement is hugely, and it's really, it's gratefully received by lots of people who receive it.
Yeah, I suppose, I talk about on these webinars quite often about the accidental manager, and I suppose that's the ultimate, isn't it? So not only do you have an accidental manager who hasn't had training in some of the key things that they need to do, now they're probably doing one of the hardest things, and actually it's also going to affect them as well. So that must be an incredibly challenging place to be. So yeah, I think some form of lots of outplacement support, etc., has got to be the way to go. So bearing in mind, so picking up the second question, I think we touched on some of these, but I think this is going to be one for you, Rena. Bearing in mind the changes in the Employment Rights Bill, what should we do now?
Yeah, touching on it briefly, I think the only thing I would add in terms of obviously looking ahead is being organised. So Claire, I think you mentioned earlier on in the session, quite often organisations don't know that these changes are going to have to take place. This is, these are things that happen suddenly as reactions to changes in environment, changes in tariffs, for example. So I think with that in mind, the best thing to do is document. So make sure that you are proactively driving performance, which is a good thing to do generally anyway. An organisation should be doing that. So again, supporting managers to be able to proactively manage, and then documenting that so that you're clear in terms of, how somebody shows that they're doing a great role, what we're measuring them against, and making sure that job descriptions and accountabilities tally, and job titles as well. You'd be surprised as to how many times job titles don't match the role that somebody's actually doing, which causes no end of confusion when you have to kick off a process like this. So actually, that's getting your house in order in the first place means that if you are in the difficult situation of having to progress a redundancy process, at least we're not having to, unpick difficulties, and we're able to have conversations, with clear and ambiguous starting points, which I think is really, really key.
Yeah, I mean, not only job titles, right? I think often people's job descriptions. So you're making people redundant, and yet their job description doesn't even match what they do now. That must be really tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite often they are years old, or somebody's moved around, or the role's evolved. So that is a particularly difficult situation for sure.
Brilliant, thank you. So here's an interesting one we come across quite often. So when focused on cost cutting, how do you put a business case together for investment in technology and outplacement services? Claire, do you want to start us on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take certainly the business case for outplacement, because it can feel quite counterintuitive if you are cutting costs and you're forced to make headcount reductions because you need to save on costs, and then actually we need to provide some outplacement support. So it can feel counterintuitive investing in outplacement when the business is making cost cutting exercises. However, hopefully we've explained already the cost of not doing it is much greater, and the potential risks, whether that's legal risks, reputational risks, the risk that your employees will face, whether that's productivity, and the message that providing outplacement support, it hugely benefits not just the individual that's receiving the support, who may have been out of that external job market for years, and they can receive some expert practical support to get them to the next job quicker. So there's huge benefits for the individual, but actually there's huge benefits for the organisation around those remaining employees. So as you said, Simon, they can see that their colleagues are being supported, because if you are in an organisation that is making regular changes, or even if this is the first time that you're going through this, your employees will be sitting there thinking, gosh, well, if it's not me this time, potentially it could be me in a future change. So again, there's a huge benefit in providing outplacement support, and the business case for that, and the ROI of the cost of providing support, when actually it can be quite cost effective. It can have huge value. So there's a really strong business case for providing this as a result of change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that our teams are well versed in sitting down with our prospects and customers in building that business case. And I suppose it's the same for technology. I mean, a business case for technology is probably easier because it's actually bringing efficiencies, so you can actually put it into numbers, where it's saving. And we talked about Meeting Manager earlier on in the webinar. But actually, if you think about the sudden impact of having to do, 1,000 redundancies or something, then we've talked about how important it is to have the process right. We've talked about how important it is for the manager to be able to focus on the colleague that they're talking to. So in terms of putting a business case for Meeting Manager, it's absolutely simple from my perspective. Also, Meeting Manager is not just relevant to those redundancy situations. A lot of our customers use it for really when they are going through large-scale organizational changes, which may not result in anybody leaving, but actually there's still a process to follow, and the costs and risks of not following it are well documented, as we've discussed above. So, but if anybody wants to talk about putting business cases together for technology and outplacement services, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We've done a few. So some great questions there, and thank you. We'll follow up with those that we haven't been able to get to, but that brings us to a close of this webinar. As we've touched on, getting this right requires robust processes, training, and investment in the right technology. And Empowering People Group is all about simple solutions to people challenges. So we're absolutely expertly placed to help with ensuring you're implementing the right solutions to drive a long-term success and support an agile and engaged workforce, which is what we're all looking for. We'd be delighted to chat through the solutions we have to get you to where you want to be. And if you'd like to discuss any of the points raised in today's session, simply drop a note in the contact box below and we'll get right back to you. So once again, thank you, Rena and Claire, for your insights in the discussion today. And thank you once again to everybody that's taken the time to join us. I hope you found it incredibly valuable. We look forward to seeing you all on another Empowering People Group webinar in the very near future. Thank you.